I'm going to be talking quite candidly in this video. It seems like a month for it. I've been very stressed lately. I'm supposed to be moving to Japan imminently, but my visa has been delayed, hopefully by only a week or two. My physical and mental health have been all over the place, and as a result, I haven't been able to read very much. I always used to film in front of some pretty bookcases. Those bookcases are gone because the books are gone. This is what I have. I've barely been reading because I couldn't cope with the stress, and trying to focus on a book just seemed almost absurd. The idea of reading right now, like why? But I need reading. I need books, I need fiction, I need things to keep my life in balance. Stories do a lot of things for us. We read for any number of reasons. Some of us read for a very specific reason. I read for many, many different reasons. And yet I really wasn't able to the last few weeks. The one thing I was able to read was poetry. And I am not a poetry person. I used to be a high school English teacher. And when I would teach poetry, and I had students telling me they didn't understand poetry or they didn't like it and they'd dig their heels in, I understood, because poetry is very overwhelming. But I also think it isn't. Poetry is overwhelming because we expect it to be. You've got people who love poetry so much and seem to know so much about it. It's all encompassing. And that can make you feel quite intimidated, like you're nothing compared to these people. You'll never understand poetry the way that they do. And then you get people who hate poetry, and you can feel kind of validated by their dislike of it. And so my relationship to poetry has gone back and forth over the years. There are poets that I used to teach when I was a teacher who I really, really enjoyed. And there are modern poets that I found that I have understood, or I felt like have understood me. And I want to talk about two of those today. As I said, my mental health has been pretty bad the last few weeks. And one of the things that has grounded me and kept my breathing steady has been the poetry of these two writers. Vuong, who is a poet that so many of us know and love. He is one of the most celebrated modern poets in the USA and across the whole world today. And a new poet, Scalpello, who is a queer Scottish writer who has really hit me like a train and also very softly kind of healed me. At the time of recording, these two poetry collections are brand new. They're very, very different, but they're both by queer poets who have really, really helped me over the last few weeks, and I'm probably going to say that phrase quite a lot through this video. I didn't choose these two poets because they're queer, but I've also been very open over the last few months about my journey to realizing my non-binary gender identity and my pansexuality. And I guess I gravitated towards these poets. And if you're someone who doesn't really understand poetry or struggles to get into it, it certainly helps to read poets that are on some kind of similar wavelength to you. They have something in common with you. You have a reason to connect with them. And for me, as a relatively newly open queer person, queer poets have been incredibly healing for me. Even when their poetry isn't about being queer, it's often about pain and healing. And pain and healing are things that we all go through. And I've been going through a lot of it recently. Vuong, as I said, is a world-renowned poet. Night Sky with Exit Wounds was a poetry collection that I read years ago when it came out, and it touched me in the way that it touched so many other people. And then I put it down. When I read it, I was in a good headspace, I read it, I appreciated it, and that was it. His novel, which is so obviously and hugely based on his own life and his experiences and his relationships, especially with his own mother, is an absolute revelation of a book. It is like nothing I've ever read, and again, so many people have said this. If you haven't read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, I can't recommend it enough. But now we have his second poetry collection, Time is a Mother. This is a collection of poetry that he wrote after the death of his mother, who inspired his novel. And this is a collection about a lot of different things. Obviously, it is fueled by his relationship to his mother, but it's also about being gay, it's about modern America, it's about so many different things. And like so much poetry, it's up for interpretation. So many of the poems in here are obviously about something very specific, but you might not feel that, you might not find it, you might not understand it, but you'll take something away from it for yourself. And that's the beauty of poetry, however vague I'm making it sound. These poems have a way of transporting you. Have you ever had a friend, or you've ever known someone who, when they read, they completely disappear out of the space that they're in. People who can read with the TV on and they can't hear the TV. I'm not one of those people. I have never been one of those readers, and I get very, very easily distracted by so many things. And as a book critic, I do sometimes struggle to read. I didn't have that problem with Time as a Mother. These poems took me somewhere else entirely. They moved me into a space that I didn't know existed. And I could be reading one and someone would want my attention, or something would be happening in the room that I'm in, and I would have absolutely no idea. There was something so transportive about everything I was reading as I read through this. And that's what I mean about how these poems have been here for me the last few weeks, and they have healed me, and they have kept me grounded, and they have kept me safe as I've read them and as I've been struggling. One of the reasons I found these poems so transportive, I think, is their form and format. Vuong plays with grammar and structure just like so many poets do. But for whatever reason that I'm not able to convey with my words, he does it better for me than so many poets that I've read. But again, I'm not an expert. I am not a broad poetry reader. But there is something about the way that he writes and the way that he plays with grammar, punctuation, structure, that just takes me somewhere else. So I'm going to read one of the poems from early on in this collection. This poem is called Dear Sarah, and I know you can't see it, but the lines in this poem are structured in such a way that without any punctuation, without any clear delineation of structure, you are able to read it pretty flawlessly. But it takes just enough mental and emotional effort from you to suck you in a little bit more. The words and the themes and what is happening in the poem pull you into a new space. But what keeps you anchored in that space is the fact that you have to put in a bit of effort to make it make sense because of the lack of punctuation and the strange grammatical structure. And I'm going to read it out loud now for the first time and just see how it sounds in my head and how it sounds to you. Dear Sarah, and if you follow these ants, they'll lead you back to stone tablets, an older desert where black bones once buried are now words where I wave to you at 2:34 a.m. They survived the blast by becoming shrapnel embedded in my brain, which is called learning. But maybe I shouldn't talk like this. Maybe I should start over. Sarah, I messed up. I'm trying to stay clean, but my hands are monsters who believe in magic. Sarah, the throat is also an inkwell, black oil wrung through your father's fingers after a day beneath the Buick. Say heartbreak and nothing will shatter. Say Stonehenge and watch the elephants sleep like boulders blurred in Serengeti rain. It doesn't have to make sense to be real. Your Aunt Rose gone 2 years now, like a trick they forgot to finish, and the air holds your voice, as it holds its own, vanishing maybe. You are the true soldier, ant hoarder of what's so massive it could crush you into a twitching comma. Sarah, your name sharpens daily against the marble of your mother's teeth. There are sparks in every calling, and called we press our faces to the womb, till we're jokes on our way to cracking up, and maybe you're right, little ant queen with your shoes, the shade of dirty paper, white desert, your pink and blue pens untouched. After all, who can stare at so many ruins and call it reading? This family of ants fossilized on the page, you slam the book shut, look out at the leafless trees doused in red April rain, where none of us are children long enough to love it. This poem does so much for me, and I don't even know what it's about. I feel so much in the words and the language and the structure, and that poem is entirely void of punctuation. There is not a single piece of punctuation in it. There are 2 pages, and each page is a thin column of words, and I feel so much as I read through that. I feel so connected to the language and the structure of it. Language is an amazing thing. We use it to communicate. We use it for a lot of things. Vuong uses it as puzzle pieces to create magic, and I don't even need to know what it's about to feel it. And this has healed me over the last few weeks. I've read the poems of this collection again and again, and I have been healed by them. Peter Scalpello's Limbic, on the other hand, is an entirely different beast. He's from Glasgow. He's a queer poet, and these poems are raw and punk. This collection is published by Cypher Press. I've talked about Cypher Press a million times on this channel. They mean everything to me. They're a wonderful indie publisher based in the UK who publish queer books by writers who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, asexual, etc., etc. And queer people like myself need Cypher Press. They've published some of my favourite books I've literally ever read in my life, and Limbic is one of the best poetry collections I've read. But once again, I am not an expert in poetry, so you're going to have to allow me that if you like. The poems in here are very, very raw. They're very punk. I need to make a video one day on what I mean because I use the word punk a lot when I talk about literature. I grew up on punk rock music. Punk is a word that means a lot to me, and I need to try to get that word out into a video when I talk about literature, poetry, even things like cartoons and video games and all the things I enjoy. Punk means a lot to me. This is punk. It's difficult for me to explain why, but I'll do that one day. This is a more explicitly queer collection of poetry. A lot of the poems in here are about abuse, neglect, love, intimacy, sex, pleasure, but also things like addiction and loss. There's a lot in here and it's difficult to read, and this has helped to heal me in a very different way because it has made me feel connected to the world around me, to queer culture, to my sexual and gender identities, and to the people who go through the things that I go through and the people who've gone through things that are far worse, that remind me of the things that I'm blessed to have, and also the fact that my own traumas and my own difficulties in life are all valid. Peter Scalpello also plays with form and format and everything else that you expect a poet to do, but he does it in a way that's slightly more raw, almost as if he doesn't care as much about whether it actually works. This is just how he feels. When you read Ocean Vuong's poetry, it feels crafted and honed and chiseled away at like a sculpture, whereas this feels more rushed and angry and fueled by emotion, and I hope that doesn't sound like an insult. The poems in here are very painful at times, and I guess since I'm comparing this to punk music, I would compare Ocean Vuong's poetry to classical music. I don't even know what that means, but that's how it feels. Again, I'm going to read one poem from this collection, my favourite poem. It's called Fizz. Fizz is a poem that has a very obvious narrative and a very obvious theme, and it hits very, very hard at the end. Fizz is 3 columns, 3 towers, all written in caps. I also need to give a disclaimer here that there is one very awful word in this poem. So a little trigger warning for a piece of hate speech. Skip forward like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it. But obviously this is a poem written by a gay writer who is writing it with a very specific reason. I don't like to say this word, but you understand it's part of this poem and it's in there for a reason. That's your warning. Fizz. You're in the kitchen and so am I. Your nascent grip prizes the fridge door wide and you ogle its innards as I glance at the back of your skull, the bunned up curls. You make everything intense. You say, "Is this yours, faggot?" Your hand around my can of Diet Coke. Yeah, it is. And you smirk me in the eye and crack it open like the act imparts your hyper-masculine intentions to dominate me. I was going to take that to work, but you swallow my fizz and turn back straight away to your girlfriend's bedroom. Later, when you are a real man inside her, you think about me. I love that poem. And I think it's a really good example of the punkness of this collection. It is angry, and it has a sense of catharsis that really hits you at the end. It explores so much about hypermasculinity, about repressed desire, and it's a way of getting back at the homophobes and transphobes and all the other phobes of this world. I love the use of the word fizz, and I love the fact that he titled it Fizz, because it's like he knows that when the word fizz comes up in that poem, it hits particularly hard. It's brilliant. It makes me laugh. The use of the word fizz, which obviously sounds like jizz, is just perfect. It makes me giggle. It makes me feel a kind of hot, happy anger that's hard to describe. There's a lot that I love about Fizz. So these are very different poetry collections, and they have both helped and healed me in very different ways. By the way, if you are interested in picking up Limbic, this is a review copy. This is not the final cover. This is the final cover. I'm very grateful to these 2 queer poets for giving me something that I really needed over the last week or 2, as I felt like my life was becoming something that I could hardly hold on to. I feel like I've been floating. My anxiety levels have been high. My fears and my nerves and my trepidations have all been almost too much for me to handle. And then I had Ocean Vuong and Peter Scalpello to keep me grounded and, I would say, happy. Although I've gone back and forth on my relationship with poetry over the last 20 years, this month I felt like I understood why poetry exists and why I need it, and why I think we all need it. It came at the right time. These collections came to me at the right time, and I'm going to hold on to them, and I'm going to reread them, and I'm going to use them as a kind of therapy while I try to figure out what happens next in my life. And I hope that these poems, or any poems, your favorite poems, whatever, I hope that you can feel like you're being a little bit healed by them as well. If you have any other queer poets specifically that you think I should check out, I would really appreciate you letting me know in the comment section, because I need more queer poets in my life, especially trans and non-binary poets. I would really appreciate that. Thank you for watching. I hope this wasn't too much of a downer, but this all meant a lot to me. Subscribe for books.